It's Thursday, September 3rd. I'm Dan Fritz.
Get up, stand up for your right.
Hello, this is Peter Mathews, and I'm here in the time slot of the Lawyers Guild. The Lawyers Guild and Jim Rafferty will be back next week, and we're here to talk today to a couple of guests and also open up the phone lines to the public for about half an hour so you can give us input on what's going on right now in your lives and the world, and particularly the gap between rich and poor. The name of the show that I've decided is going to be Standing Up for Social and Economic Justice. And that says it all, basically, that it is time now that we stand up for our rights, as Bob Marley said. We're being trampled upon by the top 1%. Actually, the top 1/2 of 1% has captured almost all the new income that was generated in the last 5 years. In fact, 400 to 1 gaps are what exists today between the highest paid, the average CEO's income compared to the average worker's 400 to 1 today, when it was 40 to 1 just in 1980. Also, the top 400 families, the richest families in America, own the same amount of wealth today as 150 million Americans. That's half the country. Let me say it again. The richest 400 families in America have the same amount of wealth as half the country, 150 million Americans. And this is completely unacceptable in a democracy, because this kind of gap, this concentration of wealth and income in the hands of a few, resembles more of a feudal system, not a social democratic capital system, not a free market system, but a feudal system in which lords and kings, their children inherit the wealth and they pass it on, and serfs basically do all the work. And we don't want to get to that point, because America is too good a country. The promise of this country is too great. That is equal opportunity for all. We've been talking about all human beings being created equal in our declaration, and yet we should practice what we preach. So we are here to talk to some folks who are actually bearing the brunt of this situation. They will give you their personal stories, starting with a professor, a part-time college professor. We'll have her on in a few minutes. Her name is Catherine, and she teaches at our Riverside Community College as well as UC Irvine, and she'll be talking to you about her situation, as there are thousands of other part-time instructors who are really people with PhDs, and they should be teaching full-time, and yet they're getting half the income of what full-timers do, with generally quite inadequate or no health coverage whatsoever. We have, for example, Mayor Garcetti has been trying to push for a $13.25 per hour minimum wage for Los Angeles. I think that's a very important beginning, but that still won't get to what it really ought to be, and that is if we include all of the new productivity, all the productivity coming in from workers where the economy has expanded and they've been producing more and more wealth, mainly for the owners, the worker productivity factored into minimum wage would place the wage today at $18.30 an hour. $18.30 is where it should be. Australia, minimum wage is $16 an hour. San Francisco, the city with the highest minimum wage for the last 10 years, has seen the highest growth in the country, economic growth, including small business growth. So the argument that quite often the right wing and others who don't care too much about American workers say that minimum wage will actually cause a loss in employment, that business will go out of business, it just doesn't hold up when it comes down to actually seeing what's happening. Because as workers have more money in their hands, as professionals have more money in their hands by getting paid a decent wage and salary, the consumer, those are the consumers, they will go out and buy more products and stimulate growth and actually make the economy hum by going out and giving money into the hands of those who earn it and not letting most of it go to the hands of the big corporate owners. We will be honoring the American tradition of rewarding hard work and also of creating an economy that will be vibrant, that will grow as it did between 1933 and 1979. During the Roosevelt era meaning that Franklin Roosevelt pushed the idea of hiring Americans directly to put money in their hands when they were unemployed, because he would not see children starving. He would not see workers just being degraded, like having to look for work for years and years. President Roosevelt said, as mainly the American people pushed him to say that, and I believe that when the people lead, the leaders will follow. So a lot of organizing and ferment in the progressive era, in the labor movement, pushed the president, pushed Congress into bringing these reforms of a 40-hour work week, a minimum wage, anti-child labor laws. All those things started at the ground up. So it is really so important to look at our history in America. The most important changes and achievements in America, starting with the Civil War, which actually was culminated because abolitionists and mainly the African-American slaves who fought and who rose up at times and gave their lives for freedom and for equality, they led the struggle for abolishing slavery. The people led and the leaders followed. The same thing with the civil rights movement. That happened the same way. The women's equality movement. So many of these movements, the LGBT equality movement, the movement for those with disabilities to have equal treatment and access to things. Every one of these movements, the environmental movement started at the ground level. People got together. They said, we are the people. We're going to demand the society become fair and just like the paper, like the Constitution says, like the Declaration says on paper. We're going to put it into practice, and the leaders followed. So it is absolutely important that we remember that and know that our history is one of struggle, of achievement of the American people over and against the powerful elites who had to give up some of their privilege to provide opportunity for everyone else. And, you know, a couple of my students came down this morning after class, after we talked about some of these things, and they said to me, Professor Mathews, do you think it's really possible for us to really change our society and make it more socially just and more fair? After all, it seems like many people aren't even aware of these issues or what's really happening to them. After all, many people are dejected and feel depressed about what's going on. They don't really think they can make a difference by getting involved in political struggle or economic struggle. And I said to them, my friends, all we have to do is remember our history and act upon it, and those who know their history can control their destiny. And we can actually make the change, especially if you young people get together, get on the internet, get your Facebook accounts going, spread the word about the facts of inequality and injustice today and how we can fix those, and we will come up with solutions, and you will come up with solutions by talking to each other. So that's how we do it, and I think it's very important to note what President Lincoln once said. This is really very much relevant to today's downsizing of our economy, outsourcing of our work, and driving down the middle class and making it disappear, and making the poor even homeless and poorer. Let's go to President Lincoln's quote. President Lincoln said, labor is prior to and independent of capital. Capital is only the fruit of labor, and could never have existed if labor had not first existed. Labor is the superior of capital, and deserves much the higher consideration. Capital is only the fruit of labor, said Lincoln, and what he meant by that is that workers existed first. When we were hunter-gatherers, we all worked for a living. We all hunted the food, we gathered berries and fruit, and we all ate together. And it was communal, and there was no one class forcing the other class to go out and work hunting for them or bringing food to them like they do today. But everyone worked, everyone ate, everyone lived. So labor came first. Then with the advent of slavery and feudalism, capital was garnered from the workers. And slaves were forced to work for the conquering tribe that enslaved them, forced them to work in agriculture, and took out surplus capital from them, took up the surplus labor, rather, and made it into capital. The same thing as feudalism. The feudal lords forced the peasants to work, the landless laborers to work, and to pay two-thirds of their produce or more in rent, and the lords would live high off the hog, as would the top lord, the king. Those are the class societies. Capitalism is very similar. It certainly allows people to start at the bottom and go to the top if they can. It allows people to be born into a very moderate level station in life, but to climb the ladder through education, through your proclivity to work hard and to come up with new talent. Capitalism is a system that allows for more freedom than feudalism or slavery, but many of the elites today are trying to push us back, whether consciously or unconsciously, into a semi-slavery. I mean, it is just horrendous that the minimum wage has not gone up in so many years to keep up with inflation. If we just raise the minimum wage based on inflation since the 1970s, the inflationary increase, we would have the minimum wage today at least $15 an hour. And like I said earlier, if we include productivity of the workers, what they produced, the labor they produced, which the capitalists and big business have taken from them, if we raised that and shared some of those profits with the workers, as we should have done, it should be $18.30 an hour. So we will be talking about all these issues of fairness and justice and equity, and what is really ethical. This is also about ethics. It is certainly about treating your fellow human being the way you would like to be treated. It is absolutely important for us to live that way so we can really learn how to create a humane society with a life for everyone that would allow them to be, hardworking people, but also be creative. We need free time for our working people, and our 99% of us, to be able to spend time with our children and nurture them and go on vacations with them and have enough income so we're only working one job at 40 hours a week, preferably even less than that. Do you guys know out there in the audience that in Europe today, the maximum work week is 35 hours a week, not 40, with full pay. 35 hours a week with full pay. That's an extra hour a day to be with your children, to come home early, to cook some food, to enjoy it, and to go out and play or take them out to a baseball game. That kind of thing is so important to life, and it's not just about living like animals where we have to work to eat and to make a living, but instead live like human beings in the higher levels of life, in the superstructural element. The substructure is the economy. We all have to work, we have to produce, and those of us who do work produce most of the wealth and food and the income, whereas those who don't work, those living off their investment incomes, primarily get rich from getting others to work hard for them. And they have the freedom. The top 1/2 of 1% has the freedom to travel the world, enjoy life, go to the art museums, and have a lot of time with their children. But the bottom 99.5% of America today is struggling, and that has to change. And I hope that this radio show will actually help everyone and people to come together, because many of you know this is happening to you, but we'll provide some statistics and some facts and figures to show you that there's real evidence that American democracy is being dismantled as the middle class is being dismantled. And I do have a book out that's written and published recently called Dollar Democracy, with Liberty and Justice for Some, How to Reclaim the American Dream for All. And this book also delves into what we've just been talking about. It also looks into the idea that, actually the reality, that those with the money are the ones who are getting main policies, including tax breaks and loopholes made for them by members of Congress, whom they helped to get elected with their huge campaign funds. And in return, the members of Congress of both parties, quite often, Democrats and Republicans, who are bought and paid for in many cases, most cases, by these corporate elites, these members of Congress vote for corporate loopholes for companies like Facebook, like Apple, like oil companies like Occidental Petroleum. These are the companies. Occidental Petroleum paid zero income tax in 2012 while receiving millions in corporate subsidies and had a negative tax burden. Facebook had the same loopholes made for them by members of Congress, where they paid zero income tax while making over $1 billion in profit last year, in 2012, for that tax year. And Facebook got a subsidy of $426 million from the taxpayer through the government to promote themselves around the world. So Facebook had a negative 40% tax burden. How do you like that? Would you guys like to have money coming back to you from the government? I certainly think a lot of us would say that would help us, even if it's a small amount. And the company of Apple Incorporated, Apple stashed $15 billion because of a legal tax loophole called the offshoring loophole in low tax haven countries like Ireland, and they avoided $15 billion in taxes last year, when there are children today with schools. 2/3 of our schools are inadequate in terms of class sizes being overcrowded, in terms of science and computer labs being shut down, in terms of, in some parts of our country, not enough textbooks to go around. Those things are happening today in our schools, while Apple and Facebook pay no income taxes, and the oil companies also have a big loophole here in California called the oil severance tax loophole. Do you know that a 15% severance tax on oil drilled from our ground in California would bring $4 billion for kindergarten through university, and would make a big difference? Community colleges have been cut back by $1 billion in the last several years. From a $3 billion budget, they've been cut back almost $1 billion, almost 1/3. And you can imagine what that does to graduation rates, because students can't get the sections they need, have to wait in line to get in the nursing program, for example. And that is unacceptable when these corporations are paying no taxes. So we have to bring back justice by bringing about tax justice, by bringing about environmental justice, educational justice, food justice. These huge corporations are actually, like Monsanto, are putting out chemicals in our food through pesticides, glyphosate in Roundup Ready pesticide, which is creating weeds that are resistant, and there are even more weeds coming in, and these crops are becoming resistant because the weeds are being killed by the pesticide, but they're also growing weeds that are resistant again, and you have those chemicals going into our food and our water, not to mention genetically modified foods, GMOs, which corporations like Monsanto are pushing throughout the world, which are very bad for our digestion. You could go to the IRT, the Institute for Responsible Technology, IRT.org, headed by Jeffrey Smith, who's written a great book on GMOs, Seeds of Deception, showing how the research that's independent research, not corporate-funded research, proves that GMOs are the very best problematic for our stomachs, our digestive systems, our immune systems, but the big corporate agriculture keeps pushing them, and we've got people like Michael Taylor as an assistant director of veterinary as well as food in the FDA. Michael Taylor, a lobbyist, a vice president of Monsanto, has been appointed by President Obama to head the FDA's department, those departments dealing with food and veterinary. This is not acceptable. So we have all kinds of issues we'll talk about here, and how we can bring back liberty and justice for all by implementing a 28th Amendment of the Constitution, which will be an amendment that would remove corporate personhood and also declare that money is not speech. And we'll talk about that in detail as we go along here a little later. But we should probably bring on our first guest, and then we'll talk a little bit more about these issues, and then we'll have the lines open up by, say, about 3:30 to bring the public in. So please, stay tuned here to KPFK and pick up your phones and call us in about 15, 20 minutes. Let's see, do we, D'Angelo, can we try to get, I think Catherine is ready to speak, so is she on the line?
Yes.
Hello, Catherine, how are you?
Hi, Peter. I'm good, thank you.
Welcome to KPFK, and it's good to have you here. And we'll start off with you telling us a bit about yourself and what you do, Catherine. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a wonderful friend of mine, and she is someone, Pat Alviso, who has been very active in the movement against unjust wars and also trying to fight for our veterans and their benefits and their rights when they come home from war. I'd like to talk to Pat. Pat, you're there right now?
Yes, I am.
Hi,
Hello,
Pat.
Peter. How are you?
Very well, Pat. Thank you. Very good. Thank you. And you are from Military Families Speak Out. Could you please let us know what the organization's about and the kind of work you've been doing?
Yes, thank you. We're a national organization made up of those of us like myself who have loved ones in the military since the war in Iraq began. And we support the troops. We want them home now, and we are always working and looking on ways that we can take care of them when they get home.
Yes, and it is so absolutely important that the least we do is to help ensure that our veterans, when they come home, they have full health coverage, including mental health care, that they have jobs that are available for them, and certainly education. And that's not the case now, is it, Pam? Is it, Pat, fully?
No, it isn't. We still have hundreds and hundreds of our veterans still waiting to get their health care appointments. And, of course, that was a big scandal that we had hitting the news. And now there's talk about starting a new war again in Iraq, and it's really
and it was, matter of fact, some of the veterans died waiting for health care, and that's one reason that General Shinseki, the Secretary of the Veterans Affairs Administration, actually had to resign. Am I right?
That's correct.
Let's talk
about. It was not a big surprise to us because, of course, we see the veterans. They're our loved ones.
Yes.
They're our families, and we can't get them appointments. It takes months and months, and some of these things are just being covered up because there was a deadline put on how soon they had to treat them or see them, and then we find out later there's these little secret lists that they were covering up.
Mm-hmm. It was a complete cover-up, and the veterans were suffering, and this is just unacceptable. And we know that a lot of this has to do with just negligence on the part of leadership and also dollar democracy, as I say in my book. We'd rather give corporate tax loopholes to Facebook and Apple. For example, Facebook paid no taxes last year in 2012, Pat, while making $1 billion in profit, paid zero income tax legally through loopholes, and received $429 million in corporate welfare. Now, couldn't some of that money have gone to help our veterans, Pat?
Of course, and now there's already millions and billions of dollars committed into starting other wars or sending arms to support Iraq. Instead of going to the vets, we can't even take care of those that have come home already.
Yes.
And hurting and wounded from our engagement in Iraq and still in Afghanistan.
And that is completely something we all have to really fight against. And what we have here is the Iraq situation, which, of course, first of all, in 2003, when President Bush was about to go into Iraq, I was actually called on NBC to come and talk about the State of the Union address where President Bush was saying, we have to go in there and get Saddam Hussein. He is involved with terrorism. There are weapons of mass destruction. I went on television on NBC and said during the news, Mr. President, let the inspections work. The UN inspections are working. Saddam Hussein is allowing us to go into all kinds of palaces and places that he could be hiding the weapons, and we are finding nothing. Mr. President, do not do it. And what did Bush do? Completely ignored all of us. And he ignored the facts, or maybe we don't know why he did it exactly, but we could always speculate. But it was outrageous that he took us to an unjust war and destroyed the lives of hundreds of thousands, if not a million Iraqis, and also several thousand American soldiers, women and men in uniform. And the Iraq nation itself, the infrastructure, completely bombed out and destroyed. Now we're going to go there and try to patch it up. After President Obama formally withdrew all of the troops, or most of them at least, a few years ago, now he's going back and sending back 700 troops to do what, Pat?
I don't know. What's the definition of insanity? It's hard to say, right? We're doing the same thing over again, expecting different results.
Yes.
As of today, we just found out we have 1,000 troops up there. There's about 35,000 in the region, 2 aircraft carriers. And, of course, they're talking about, and we support them trying to protect the embassy if we're getting out of there, but at the same time, we understand there's a huge, huge danger here with our weapons we're supplying both sides of this war. There's money being made with our arms being shipped not to just the Iraqi government, such as it is with Maliki's government, but also our arms are being shipped through Saudi Arabia and being used by the ISIS group.
The ISIS group, yes. So both sides are getting our arms, are using it, and our weapons manufacturers here are making huge amounts of profit. Am I right?
Yep.
And this is so outrageous. Correct. You know who else made profit, Pat, during these wars? PepsiCo. Companies like that were making potato chips, supplying, billions and billions of potato chips to our soldiers, and drinks, made these what you would normally think of as defense contractors, but companies like PepsiCo were making so much money. And by the way, many members of Congress own stock in PepsiCo. So this is a complete revolving door that's got to be looked at carefully, Pat, and exposed, and we got to get dollar democracy out of our system and really get some sanity. And what you're doing and what the Military Family Speak Out is doing is so heartfelt. And, you tell us what else you do in terms of raising awareness, Pat, when you hold those wonderful vigils on the beach and places like that. Tell us what you do there, Pat.
Well, we have teen memorials. There are over 400 teenagers that have been killed in these wars, and we do put our crosses up near schools where young people can think about what it really means to join the military today. And also we have our Arlington West in Santa Monica here in Orange County as well, where we put up the symbols of crosses and other symbols up on the beach to represent those that have fallen in the war. But,
yes.
We're also working really hard on the legislative edge, too, because there's things going on that people need to know about. And the issue here now is we can start getting our representatives behind some legislation that's being floated in Congress by Barbara Lee to have congressional approval before we commit any troops, before there's any military action. There's also something at the Senate level under Senator Merkley's bill. If we could get our representatives in the Senate and the House to push for this congressional oversight before there's any bombing or before the status of forces agreement is signed to continue having our troops there for another 2 years in Afghanistan. We can get our rep to sign on to this legislation that's already out there. That would be a big thing. So we're doing a lot of that kind of work, getting in touch with our representatives saying, look, the people do not want these wars. They cannot continue to ask families like ours to make any more sacrifices. This is not a draft.
No.
It's my son, it's Rosanna's son, it's Evelyn's son and daughters that are going to wars, and they've been going over and over and over again.
Yes. Over and over, so many terms of service, and it just is wearing completely on them. And these are unjust wars, Pat. There's no justification
Absolutely.
to go. There was nothing. All those reasons that Bush gave were totally false. And it's time that you're right about Congress. Congress cannot be derelict in its duty. It is a co-equal branch. The constitutional founding fathers or the founders of the country said that Congress has to vote for war resolution. It's not the president who can declare war. It's only Congress that can do that. And Congress has to take back its power. And let me ask you this. The Barbara Lee legislation and Jeff Merkley's legislation was very important for us to get behind that. Am I right?
That's correct. We have over 80 representatives in Congress that are now signing on to the Barbara Lee bill. So it's gaining some traction. And, we need to do more than just demand no military strike. Let's get our heads straight on this. Over 1 million civilians, mostly women and children, were killed in our last bombing. And we know that the people who suffer the most when we start bombing are those civilians that are caught in the crossfire.
Yes.
And right now we know there's over 1 million civilians that are trying to flee their cities in Iraq.
It is humanitarian catastrophe, and it's just unacceptable. And we've got to do something here. And I'm glad that you're taking these actions, Pat, along with the other folks in your organization. And we'll get the word out about the Merkley and the Lee legislation to get Congress to reassert.
And it's not enough to just ask for no strike. Let's talk about humanitarian aid and diplomacy.
Yes, absolutely. Humanitarian aid and diplomacy can work wonders, and it needs to be used a lot more. And it's not what the neocons did, is it, or what they believe in? They believe in preemptive strike, and strike first before you're struck, and that's a disastrous doctrine that has brought us nothing but disaster. It has caused us a horrible downturn in our economy, the greatest recession since the time of the Great Depression. We have lost trillions of dollars worth of wealth. People have lost their homes. Young people cannot graduate from college, and this country is a great country, but it needs to be brought back once again because these wealthy, rich people owning corporations have really sold us out, and we've got to turn that around. So we will be certainly involved with this, with you, and we'll struggle for social justice. The theme of this show has been standing up for social and economic justice. So thank you so much, Pat, and we really do appreciate your time here.
MFSO.org if anybody wants more information.
MFSO.org. Military Families Speak Out. MFSO.org. Thank you so much. Thank you, folks, for listening today. And thank you, Pat, for being here. And we'll continue our struggle. Thank you so much, and God bless you.